because SharePoint is something new, and uh, everyone wants to learn about it. So for those who don't have experience or even on a high level, I'd like to show this video. Hindi ako papatalo kay Tep. May video din ako.
History has taught us that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That working together, we are able to accomplish more than we could ever accomplish on our own. That when great minds come together, anything is possible. So we are reinventing the way people work together. We are making it easier than ever before to share ideas, discover connections, ask questions, find answers. Stay in sync. Organize information. And build the team that takes an idea and makes it a reality. SharePoint, the new way to work together.
The topic is collaboration, and that's the main feature that SharePoint is known for. So what we'll talk about tonight will be an overview of SharePoint, the improvements that it has come up with from 2010 and 2013. We'll be discussing collaboration features. Of course, you've seen the deck already, the video. It's shown us how we collaborate and how we work together in social. Obviously, it's mobile capabilities. But more importantly, I think the focus of tonight will be SharePoint, the new development model. What we've seen in the video are all out of the box. You buy the product, you can use everything there. And so how do we extend this? And that's what we want to delve in tonight. All right. So what is Microsoft SharePoint? Microsoft SharePoint is a web application platform. Just in case you don't know, if for those, I'm sure every one of you who came here wanted to know SharePoint. It's used in 50% of all intranet sites. We don't see it, it's because it's intranet, but I think 76% of the Fortune 500 companies have SharePoint on their intranet. The 50% is for all other companies. So what's its use? Intranet portals. The video is a perfect example of our intranet portal. Document file management, collaboration, social networks. So it's an excuse to block Facebook. Use SharePoint instead of Facebook. Extranets, internet portals. There are several internet sites which are made by SharePoint. So just because it's an internet site doesn't mean it's not made by SharePoint. Porsche is an example of one. The website of Porsche and Ferrari is SharePoint. Accenture's homepage is done by SharePoint. Enterprise search and business intelligence. All right, so SharePoint 2013 introduces a lot of new features, improvements. Slowly, from 2003 and 2003, 2007, 2010, and 2013, SharePoint has been incrementally growing, and even its adoption has been increasing. Right now, there's a big demand for SharePoint because big companies use it, but there's little training. Only big companies can actually afford it also. So basically, there are branding improvements. It's a lot easier to brand now than before. We won't go into details for that. We have business data connectivity improvements. Before, we can source data from SQL databases, from SQL, Active Directory, web services. Right now, SharePoint's able to get OData data, which is open data. So we can get Twitter, we can get Facebook data, and store it in SharePoint. We also have content management improvements. It's a lot easier to change items, to edit a page, to create branding, create layouts. It's a lot easier. We also have a new centralized identity management. So right now, we can integrate our SharePoint and use our Facebook logins. If you're a small company, you want to use SharePoint instead of creating IDs for everyone, you can use Facebook, Twitter, Google. These can easily be integrated. Search, before search of SharePoint is now provided by FAST. Microsoft bought FAST, I think, 2009. And after they bought FAST, they integrated the features of FAST. So as companies, you don't need to pay $1 million to get a FAST apply. There are 2 ways to install applications. Before solutions, may scoping din ng solutions. We had farm, we had web application, we had site collection, we had web. For applications, SharePoint apps, basically have 2. We only have site scoped and tenant scope, I think. So site scope installation is installed on a specific site. So when you install a site, punta ka sa site mo, let's say accenture.com/capability, that's one SharePoint site. And you can add apps as you wish, and those apps will only be exposed to you. We have one installation, one site installation is to one application instance. There's no resource sharing. Last is tenancy scope applications. For enterprise, kunyari, if you're a company of 200,000 people, we have 3,000 site collections, and meron ng app na maganda. Makes life easier. And instead of having all these 3,000 people go to the site, add mo, you trust it, we have what we call a tenancy scope installation. Basically, what this does is that install, push to everyone who needs it. You can specify criteria, but basically, it's just one installation. Kung ang previous slide natin, we had one app installation to one SP site. Here, we have multiple SP sites sharing just one app instance. So there. It's usually installed in the app catalog site because that's the only place you can install tenancy scope applications, because that's where you control the catalog. So we have basically 2 types of apps. We have, 3, if we want to be more strict about it. We have 3 types of apps. We have SharePoint hosted apps. Basically, what are SharePoint hosted apps? These are apps where we have a sub-site. It creates an invisible sub-site, and that's where the apps are. We have this term called app web. So if you've been reading about SharePoint, you'll hit this terminology often. App web, host web, app web, host web. App web is the invisible sub-site, which is not usually accessible by anyone inside SharePoint. One problem here is that it can only have client-side code. Just to differentiate client-side code, it doesn't mean CSOM. This means client-side scope. JavaScript lang ang pwede sa SharePoint-hosted sites. That's SharePoint-hosted apps, I'm sorry. Only client side. Then we have cloud-hosted apps. These are also known as externally hosted. Another, we have host web. Already we had app web, and we have remote web. Remote web is what we call the remote site. Your SharePoint site basically means that you can install an app, then this app is hosted on a different location. It can be internet, different domain, definitely. And it talks to you using SharePoint. We have this app. For those who've used SharePoint, a famous example of an app is that you have your document library. Tapos gusto mo i-back up to, let's say you had a Dropbox. Let's say Dropbox can actually do this, or you can do this yourself and sell it. You have your document library, tapos usually pag click mo yung context menu, ano lumalabas? Edit, check out, check in, delete. You can use an app to include something new there. Let's say save to Dropbox. What this does, it opens the app will send the file to Dropbox and probably sync it elsewhere with custom logic. Obviously, this app is not hosted on your site, and it's a third-party provider. Majority of the apps are cloud-hosted because, obviously, if you're Accenture, for example, or if you're Microsoft, you wouldn't want anyone to install apps on your machines. Install it yourself, build it yourself. Medyo mahal din kasi ang hosting. Obviously, this is the only way to have server-side code. Pag sinabing server-side code, this is not the SharePoint server-side object model. This is your normal server-side code. PHP, ASP.NET, Ruby, Python, CGI, ASP, Classic, if you still want to. Pero those are the only cloud-hosted apps can have there because it's not hosted in SharePoint, it's hosted elsewhere. Microsoft doesn't care what you do with the code and on your server. Okay. Obviously, before you install the application, dapat existing na yung site mo. Your app must be already installed. Then an app ID must be registered to installation. Basically, app ID is just a GUID. Later on, we'll try to see if we have time pa. Just a simple app, but unfortunately, it's not cloud-hosted. Okay, last type of app is auto-hosted app. Auto-hosted app is an app deployed in Office 365. Office 365 kasi has API. Underneath Office 365, it uses Azure. It's Azure VMs. It's like your Amazon cloud services. It's like your Google App Engine, Google, yung VMs ng Google. So basically, think of auto-hosted app as a provider-hosted app, pero when you install this app, it tells Azure, create me a website magically. So andun na yung DLLs, yung packages ng website mo, and Azure will create that. Yun lang ibig sabihin ng auto-hosted. It's a hosted application, but it's automatically created. So yun. I'd like to thank you, but before that, we'll try to get a demo. We'll just focus on showing one app. I'd like to show us how the app works, how it's developed. We mentioned that we needed Visual Studio. So, sige. Naka-run ba to? Anyway. So, we have each app is usually a solution. So, when we create an app, for example, this one, so just to be, it's SharePoint.techtalk.webforge. We have this the company called WebForge. Yung client ni some apps. Tapos provider-hosted SharePoint app. Then usually, kasama ng provider-hosted SharePoint app is we have a app web. Kasi, obviously, a SharePoint provider-hosted app has nothing. It just tells us, ang contents niya lang, mas stiff neck ako nito. So, all it has is a manifest. So if we take a look at the code, it basically just tells us saan naka-install yung app, ano yung website na pupuntahan ko to display the app. So we have something like this. So right now it's external.web4consulting.com/pages/default. So we can add permissions. So dito rin natin sineset yan. So yan, you want the app to access BCS. You want it to access project. You want it to access social. You want it to access a list. If you want it to access everything, it also has it, yung tenant. Pag sabing tenant, it's everything. Everything that you wanted, it can be controlled. Obviously, chances are hindi ma-approve yan. Pero you can give permissions which are distinct. So hindi talaga you can give very granular permissions. So I'll give you as an example. I think I'll just show. An example of our SharePoint app. So we have a SharePoint hosted app, which is this one. So if you'll notice, just comparing, yung SharePoint provider hosted app, wala siyang laman. Kasi, ano ba sasabihin niya? Punta mo tong website na to, ito yung laman ng apps. Whereas ang SharePoint hosted apps, madami siyang laman. It has your images, kung meron kang gustong i-display. You have the current pages, default.aspx. Obviously here, it doesn't have code behind. We mentioned bawal ang code behind ang server side sa SharePoint apps. So, we have code here. How do we interact with SharePoint? We created a JavaScript sa content. Yan. CSS pala to. Scripts. Yan. We have scripts here. We have app.js. And we have what we call the object model. Pero, ayan. So we have, we call client context. We have basically, these are SharePoint objects. May 1:1 mapping. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, instead, just go to MSDN, look at the manage SharePoint object. Meron din, kung may client context sa JavaScript, may client context sa manage. Kung may client context sa manage, mayroon it's usually a 1:1 relationship. So, yan, using all JavaScript, we can actually, basically what this does is I have a list somewhere on my SharePoint site, and I just want to display it in a better way, none out of the box. So let's open that instead. So we have out of the box, this is what we see in SharePoint 2013. Hindi na natin pupuntahan yung social kasi hindi siya naka-configure. We wanted to focus on apps. So, ano ngayon ang meron sa app natin? So we can, we have this list called books. I pre-installed it for our, so basically list of books lang siya. So if you wanted to display, we have American Gods, we have Anansi Boys, we have Game of Thrones, we have Stardust, and their corresponding authors. So ano magagawa natin? We want to edit, we want to view it, we check out, share, delete. So that's out of the box. And sometimes we don't want it to be that simple. So we can create an app. So I think I'll just show you the app, then we'll go through how it's installed and what it does. So I'll just show you. So instead, let's create an app which is a lot more user-friendly, kumbaga. Sorry, we'll have to manage our own DNS. It's 8.1.103. Close the browser. So, sige. I guess I'd like to take this chance to... Does anyone have questions? So, regarding the technology, so please, wag kayo mahiya. I think we have mic stands there. So, while I'm setting this up, maybe we can have the questions na.
So, do we have any questions so far from the audience?
this
Anything
side?
about SharePoint?
Any
Please don't be shy. I know the
questions?
first one's the hardest. Oh, here, we got one. Okay.
So you mean just a question about you can access this through any mobile device, right? Even Android,
Yeah,
as long as it's web-based.
yeah.
How about for the plugins or the things you need to install? If it's just a view mode, you can access it.
Well,
Or-
if you think about what SharePoint is, it's basically a website, no? So, as long as you have a browser, you should be able to access anything, even the apps. So, the apps also have to be web-based. So, we have this conception kasi na apps are something installed on SharePoint. It's installed, but it also has to be web-based.
About the trusting, the part about trusting the.
Okay, trusting. Very good question. Basically, what's done, we have, this is medyo deep na, no? So we have what we call S2S, which is high trust. There are two things. Basically, kunyari ako, I want to create an app. So I have to provide a certificate. Okay. Ito, I have a certificate, yung PFX, we have a certificate. A certificate is composed of two keys, private key and public key. So ako, I have a certificate, I have my private key. Every request that I'll send to you, I'll sign it. Then, using the public key, SharePoint, there's configuration to be done, and SharePoint has to trust your public key. And all the requests coming from your side are signed using your private key. So, if you Google high trust, so when we say high trust or server-to-server, high trust authentication, that's how trust is established in SharePoint 2013.
But for mobile browsers, is it easy to install those certificates?
No, sorry. When we say, kasi ito na lang, kunyari, Google, no? Sa Google created an app. So, si Google, sige, Microsoft, pa-install nito. So, Google needs data from SharePoint. So, Google signs his certificate and gets data from SharePoint. That's the trust that I'm talking about. You as an end user, transparent sa'yo yan. You don't have to do anything. An app is an app. So, view mo, makita mo, nothing to do. As long as you're signed in SharePoint, view your app, signed in ka na rin doon.
Okay. Actually, this might be a little unorthodox, but I also actually have a question.
Okay.
I want to get to know a little bit more about SharePoint as well. So, what you're talking about with the SharePoint apps, these would work within an organization as long as you're part of the SharePoint.
Yeah.
But does that mean that, in a way, I could also scale this to become sort of my app engine for any public-facing app? Like, let's say I wanted to do the next Facebook or Twitter, where that's open to anybody. So could it work the same way, where if they created an account, they would become part of the organization, and you could use the app the same way?
Yeah. Well, SharePoint, as we mentioned, the slides. One of its main purposes are content management and also internet portal. So that's not stopping you. Right now, we keep on thinking enterprise, 200,000 people lang.
Yep.
And it's a private intranet server. But SharePoint can be exposed outside. Porsche is a good example. www.accenture.com is, you can sign up dun eh.
Yeah.
And you're part of the SharePoint. They're basically using SharePoint. And if you want to SharePoint2013 and you want the user to view their apps, customize it, definitely possible.
So if you're creating an app and you want something like a hosted platform for it, you could use SharePoint as something like the framework for that.
O365 would be the best
Alright, cool.
option.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sa business model ni SharePoint, may chance ba na kumita yung mga app developer? Paano ba sila kikita pagka nag-develop sila ng mga app nila? Paano ba yung business model niya nakikita yung mga magde-develop ng mga apps?
Okay. Similar to how, right now, obviously, walang ads. So, everything may free and there's also paid. A good example is Nintex. Nintex is a multi-million-dollar company. And they're the best-selling app in the App Store. So, you can create very simple apps na you can ask them to pay for it. Sometimes yung apps natin, since these are enterprise apps, they go up to $100, $200. Nintex, for example, I believe is $600. And that's just on one customer. Obviously, maraming ways to monetize it. Right now, I don't think Microsoft has revenue share. I may be wrong. Don't quote me on that. Alam ko, wala pang revenue share. It may be in the future. Also, one shortcoming of it in terms of business model is that buy once lang to. So, there's right now, walang subscription model sa apps eh. I think Microsoft are working on it so that we can have subscription. But right now, it's all just appliances. Create an app, hopefully somebody buys it from you, get everything, all the revenue. Kaya lang, wala kang recurring revenue. I think that's why price points are high sa App Store.
Thank you. I think we have a question up front. Sure.
Hello, good evening.
Yes.
Yes, so may question lang ako regarding dun sa since na-mention na niya kanina yung parang price model. Since SharePoint is mostly on internet scale, yung mga websites, most of it are internet, naisip ko lang, pwede bang magkaroon ka ng parang app catalog, pero internet scale lang? For example, for a huge corporation, marami mga subsidiaries, may mga iba-ibang sites na kanya-kanya mga content management, kanya-kanya document library, iba-iba yan eh. Parang naisip ko, kunyari meron kang sariling catalog na may system integrator lang or kung ano man yung IT arm ng isang corporation na yun, nang gagawin niya, meron siyang app catalog doon, tapos whenever someone from the other subsidiaries or the other sites na mag-subscribe or bibili ng app sa'yo, pwede mo bang ma-setup yun na gano'n na kunyari, meron kang mga KPIs na ilalagay doon, na ano ba yung most downloaded, mga ganyan, or possibly on a user level ba yung pricing na sisingilin mo, pwedeng gano'n, or site-based, parang gano'n.
All right, just to answer the question, is that we have two types of app catalogs. We have the Microsoft Store, which is where anyone can publish, but internally, you also have your organization store. So anyone can create, kunyari kayo, IT of 200,000 people, you can make apps which are very specific for your organization's purpose. One example is, let's say you have an HR site. You can create an HR app where on this dashboard, you see all open tickets assigned to you or all documents that needs your approval. So that's something you can do. So not all apps will be exposed to the public immediately. We have the organization app catalog, which is separate from the Microsoft app catalog. All right. So every site will have their own catalog. So if you'll notice here on the left side, we have, let's go to the home page. The home. Okay, we have apps for SharePoint, we have apps for Office. So go back to, this is what we call the app marketplace, the app catalog. So you can put your apps here for apps for SharePoint. Obviously, we only have one, which is what I created. And you can install that. Going back to your sub-site, let's say your organization site, let's say I wanted to add something. So this is our app. We want to add an app. There we go. Add an app. You'll notice that we have new apps you can add. We also have apps from your organization. And the apps from your organization are those which you have developed inside and you don't want to share in public. Again, the apps that we create, we can upload it in Office 365, but it has to pass a certain standard also. And obviously, it has a review time. Do you have anything to follow up?
For example, yun nga, interested nga ako makuha tong app na to. Meron ba yung parang din, parang control din na parang para ma-download mo to, you have to pay something. Pero organization
Within the organization.
Within the organization. Meron bang ganong way?
Unfortunately, for organization apps, it assumes it's free. The way I played with it, I haven't been able to set up a price. Because obviously, the infrastructure itself for payment is big.
Pero yung mga nagda-download na users or yung site na gumagamit, matatrack mo naman yan. No? Kumbaga, at the end of the you can generate a report wherein you can see all of those users or sites na nag-use tong site na yan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we actually have another question over here on this side.
Hello, good evening. I have two questions, actually.
All right.
My first question is, does SharePoint 2013 still support Silverlight? And my second question is, does Microsoft still has plans to continue with Silverlight along the lines of SharePoint 2013, or are they going to ditch it and move to HTML5?
All right. Again, regarding Silverlight, any modern browser supports Silverlight. If your modern browser supports it, you can use it in SharePoint. SharePoint is just a web platform. So the next question is SharePoint 2013 actually endorsing the use of Silverlight? The answer is no. So we're endorsing web standards. So there's nothing, it doesn't make, if you make something in Silverlight, it's as if you're making it in ASP.NET. It's the same thing in, you have to just create your, basically Silverlight's just HTML. Controls itself do not use Silverlight. In SharePoint 2010, there was a small, tight integration with Silverlight. 2013, if you don't have Silverlight, everything will still work.
Silverlight as a technology will have a particular niche area. There are existing applications that use Silverlight. Use Silverlight if Silverlight is there. I would advise anyone developing enterprise applications, if you want portability, especially for mobile applications, go with HTML5. There are certain, again, I'm a Microsoft guy, but Silverlight would have certain uses for specific line of business applications. Silverlight as a skill is still valuable. If you know Silverlight, you would know SAML, you would know WPF, build that skill. Those skills will be needed. But if you're developing a business or an enterprise application and you're targeting multiple browsers, multiple devices, HTML5, JavaScript, CSS is the way to go.
Yes, sir. We have a question right here.
Oh, okay.
Hello, good evening. We have seen you use Visual Studio as a tool for creating SharePoint application, right? Okay, and also, SharePoint application produce a JSON format. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. Does it mean that the developer can create a simple web page with JavaScript to consume the JSON format? JSON data?
Yeah. Basically, you can create a web page. Basically, these are apps again. Again, we mentioned that we have provider-hosted app, which is hosted externally. And if you want to consume that, you can use JSON. Again, the issue will be trust, because you need to establish trust between your application and SharePoint. Because he doesn't, SharePoint is mapagduda, doubtful. Doesn't trust you as easily. You have to establish trust. So you can create an HTML page, upload it on your SharePoint. That doesn't mean you can call the JSON. Again, this security thing, we don't want anyone just creating anything and go into. That's also why we have permissions.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So thank you, everybody who asked questions.
Thank you so
thank
much
you again to
to
Mr. Jason
Jason.
Irana. Can we give him a round of applause?